We are recording this training for future participants so that we can maximize this time, this training time, and train other DC government employees who'd like to take the trainers training in supported decision making. And this training is brand new for us. I've been doing trainings now for several months for other staff at our agencies, including our service coordinators and vocational rehabilitation counselors. And the model of training our service coordinators is what I'll be showing today as our Train the Trainers session. Because what people need to do at their own agencies or organizations, if this is used by people who work for private organizations, is to tailor a training like this according to what it is that your staff needs. And you'll see that as we go along. So what I want to do is just go through the training like I would as if we were training people at your agency or people at my agency. And we'll just run through it this way. If people would be so kind as to participate, that would make this a lot more fun and the time go faster. This training takes about an hour and a half, maybe a little bit less. So this is a warm-up exercise. I hope everyone can see the PowerPoint slideshow here. It's showing on the screen. This is a warm-up exercise that we did at a national symposium on supported decision-making here in Washington last spring. And generally we have people do it with a partner if we're training in person, or we're just have people call out these answers if people are taking the training virtually as we are here today. So, but it's written as though you're training in person, which is how I originally was training our staff before everyone got sent home to work. So the idea is to come up with 3 nouns to describe yourself. So for example, I'm an attorney, I'm a parent, and I'm a dog owner. If people could mute themselves, that would be terrific. Unless you're speaking. So if you think of 3 nouns to describe yourself, does anyone want to share those for the group? If so, I think you can unmute and just call them out.
I'm a parent, a social worker, and a wife.
Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good morning. This is Jalima.
Oh,
I am a daughter, a sister, and a social worker.
Great. Thank you so much. Gold stars to those who are participating, because I think you get more out of it if you do as well. So the next step in this kind of warm-up exercise is to think of 3 decisions that you made today. So I will share that I decided to take my dog on a walk where I found a 4-leaf clover this morning that is sitting here on my computer. I decided to wear a short sleeve shirt because it's just so darn hot out there. And, I decided to have oatmeal for breakfast. So does somebody else want to share, like, what are 3 decisions that you've made already today, even though it's only 7 minutes after 10 this morning?
This is Clarence, and you actually took some of mine. I wrote what to wear, what to have for breakfast, and what time to have a unit meeting tomorrow.
Oh, that's great. Thanks, Clarence. I appreciate that. So,
hi, this is LaShawn.
Oh, go ahead, LaShawn.
Oh, I'm sorry. Was you going to say something?
No, go right ahead. I'm thrilled with your participation, everyone. That's terrific.
So I also decided to walk my dog this morning. I also put on a sweater this morning because sometimes I get cold, and I know I was going to be in this meeting. And I decided to eat a small breakfast, a grapefruit this morning.
Great. Thanks so much. So the reason, as we could see, the reason that these, we've talked about so far is so important is because the decisions that we make in our lives have everything to do with kind of who we are and what kind of life we're living. And that's important for the people that we support at our agency and the people you support at your agencies as well. it's important because it has everything to do with people's quality of life, but it's a matter of human rights. It's a matter of DC law in terms of the Department on Disability Services where I work. It's a matter of agency policy. Supported decision making is, and supporting our DC residents. And there's just a lot of reasons why supported decision making is so important. And here's what we're going to cover in today's training. So if you are doing a training for your trainees, this is kind of a recommended approach from us, which is first to review the principle of presumed capacity for people to make decisions. And we're going to go into each of these issues to help trainees, that's you all, learn at this moment, and people that you are training in the future learn about supported decision making, to explain supported decision making as a DC right. And the reason we're launching this training series is because there was a new right created 2 years ago as a human service agency trainers to know how to teach your staff to take a positive approach to supported decision making. As we know, that's key to self-determination of people with disabilities. How to teach good practice in supported decision making and teaching the practical points of how to honor a person's supported decision making. So we'll have both kind of a look at some of our policies, and then there's some practice exercises as well. Do people have any questions about what we're going to cover in the training?
No questions.
Okay. So we're going to start with the concept of presumed capacity. I'm guessing you are probably all familiar with it, but it's an important thing for people to understand who are supporting people with disabilities across the district and in other places in the country as well. Under DC law, all residents are presumed to have the capacity to give what's called written informed consent or consent to things. However, there are some issues that call that into question. If a person is not sufficiently informed, is not able to understand information, or cannot communicate a decision, then a person's capacity to give informed consent may be questioned, but only in this way. Only if a clinician signs a form that says the person lacks legal capacity, may the court then decide that the person needs a guardian, general or limited. And the reason that we're focused on this is because sometimes people with disabilities, and I work a lot with people with intellectual disabilities, but people out in the community may think that they can just decide that a person does not have capacity to make their own decisions, when in fact, unless a court has decided that they do not have capacity to make their decisions and that somebody else has the power to make decisions for them, they have the right to make decisions if a court has not decided those things. And we're going to talk some about guardianship, general or limited, but that has to do with the scope of decisions that a court determines that a person cannot make and where they name somebody else to make decisions for them. We're going to go into that a little bit later. So supported decision making, and I'm guessing that some of you are familiar with this, but this is how we explain it when we're training staff or people in the community. The heart of supported decision making is as simple as this: a person with a disability who needs to make a decision, and a supporter that the person chooses who assists that person as they need. I always like this Keith Haring piece of art here. I know it's used for the Best Buddies program as well. One of our organizations in the district we're lucky to have is the DC Quality Trust for Individuals with Disabilities, and that organization also houses the National Center for Supported Decision Making. And they prepared some material for us last year that I'm using in this training, and you're welcome to use it, or you're welcome to, sort of build some trainings of your own off of the National Center for Supported Decision Making. Has a lot of resources on their website as well. But they want to emphasize that supported decision making is a paradigm, not a governmental process where a person with a disability makes choices with support or assistance. And you're going to see this throughout the training, that I just repeat some of the points over and over using different words as a matter of just kind of teaching emphasis. This supported decision making is a DC right that empowers the person to make decisions, and where the person chooses who supports them. And that support has to be individualized. It's not it's not a form process. The level and type of supports depends on the person, and supporters do what the person needs so the person can make their own decisions. Um, it sounds simple, and it is in some ways, but let me just go a little bit. This is more kind of getting into the technical material and supported decision making here in the district and around the country. What we want to do is distinguish for people informal from formal supported decision making, and these are just, I think, commonly understood terms. Informal decision making is kind of what's shown in this first, Keith Haring picture, like I showed before, the person needs supports and the supporter. Compared to formal supported decision making, which includes those things, but where there is also a paper, it can be a digital form, but a piece of paper that is a formal supported decision making agreement. And we're going to talk about that and look at the district's model for that. Either way, the person chooses their own supporters, but the difference between informal and formal is that in formal supported decision making, there's this agreement, there's this written agreement between the person and their supporter. So again, this is, where we just reemphasize the person is the decision maker, the supporter's role is to meet the person's needs, and what may a supporter do? And this just helps with kind of the practical, what are the nuts and bolts of how this thing really works? For people who haven't worked in supported decision making, my experience so far in training with them is this is for people who have worked with a lot of people with guardians, or people have worked with people whose family members have kind of served de facto in this supporter role for people. It's important to keep repeating that the person gets to choose their supporters, and that the supporter may help the person do all these things: gather information, ask questions about information or about choices, to help the person understand choices and the risks and benefits, and help the person communicate their decisions. And here we're just, kind of repeating the information again. I have found that kind of repeating it in these different ways helps it stick. Quality Trust said the key question for supporters is, what will it take? What will it take for the person with a disability to be able to make their own decisions? And no, there's no one size fits all, and supported decision making looks different for different people and different families in their supported decision making. And my own family, the way I help my mom when she has decisions to make are pretty different from the way I help my nephew who has intellectual disabilities. And just the level and depth of exploring the options and explaining them and trying to explain them in different ways. If my words are, too complicated, or words that my nephew is not familiar with. So just emphasizing that that it's individualized. So this is a practice exercise that we've used in our trainings to ask people to think of an important life decision that they need to make, the person being trained, and imagine they would need help to make it. And then ask these questions. Who would you choose as a supporter? What about that person made you think of them? And then what we have asked them to do is to list 3 qualities of a good supporter. If you're looking for a good supporter, what are 3 of the qualities? And then what we've done is had them share the results using their mobile phone. We've had them log on here, and so I'll ask you to do the same thing. And use this menti.com is one of these word cloud apps. It's pretty cool. I gotta say, I don't know if everybody's used it before, but if you log on there and then you use this digital code 111855 and list in there 3 qualities of a good supporter, I'm going to exit this PowerPoint for a minute, jump over to that screen and show you our word cloud results, okay? So I'm hoping everybody has this and is doing it. And I'm going to just skip out of this for a second, jump over to my other screen and show you our results. Give me 1 second, everybody. Apparently I have just too many of these apps open. All right. I don't know why it doesn't want to show that. There we go. Are people able to see my screen here?
Hey Liz, it's Emily. I see your screen, just not the website yet.
Oh, you're not seeing the qualities of a good supporter?
Not yet.
Okay.
Try share web browser.
Here it is.
There it is. Yep.
All right. Thank you, Emily. So we've got the first few answers that have come in. If you look at the top of this screen, you'll also see the website is www.menti.com. And then here's the code 111855. Some of the qualities we have in so far are creative, good listener, calm. Definitely agree with all of those. Some of the other characteristics that I've seen people put into this screen are knowledgeable. Here we go. Knows the person well. Thanks for participating, everyone. Thoughtful, caring, a good listener. Yes, totally agree with these things. So this cloud gets more interesting. I've had, as many as 20 or 25 people on some of these trainings, and then this word cloud gets very interesting. And as people see the answers, they come up with new things to say as well. I'm going to jump back into our PowerPoint here. I'm going to jump through these slides and catch us up here. So that's just one way to get people, especially if you're doing a virtual training, a little bit more involved in the training. But it's fun when we do it in person too. At the DC Department of Disability Services, we do this at town hall meetings when there are several hundred of us in the room, and we've done these word clouds. And there's a lot of interesting terms that people use when you get into larger groups like that. People are very creative. So one of the things that we want to emphasize in the district is that supported decision-making in the district is not new. People with disabilities have been using supported decision-making, informal supported decision-making for a long time. But also there's been some formal decision-making abilities for people who are district students who are aged 18 and above. Obviously, if they're minors, their parents have decision-making rights. But once they turn 18, they have their own decision-making rights unless a court decides they do not. Both District of Columbia Public Schools and the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, and I apologize for the extra E I see right there, both have had supported decision-making forms, supported decision-making agreements that can be used in either the public or charter schools for several years. And the reason we emphasize this is because the use of supported decision-making agreements is also not new in the district. These two forms have been available for several years, but also because it could be that if somebody is coming to one of the district government agencies, they may carry with them one of these forms. And if they've worked well for them in the past, believe that they could be used in the future. And so what we want to do is just make sure that people we're training know that in agencies, that if a person shows up with either a DCPS form or an OSCE form, supported decision-making form, that it may signal a staffer that a conversation about supported decision-making needs to be held. does the person want to use a supporter for decision making while they're receiving human services agency supports or services? So it could just be an entree into a conversation. These are only valid in an educational context. These specific forms, they were developed for use in the schools by adult students. They're for use in the schools, but they can signal this conversation. So we want to just emphasize to people that, these school forms could be brought in to an agency. So here's what here are kind of the steps that we teach people, that our agency will honor their request to use supported decision-making. We explain how informal supported decision-making works at our agency. So you would do that at your agency, exactly how that works. Explain about supported decision-making available to adults in non-school context or government agency context in the district. We're going to go into some details about that, and that our agency accepts the form if they want to use it. And we're going to talk about that next. And then emphasizing to a person with disabilities that whether to use supported decision-making is in fact one of the decisions that they can make. So, this is what we were just covering, that informal supported decision-making has been available in DC, and sort of outline how your agency has done that. And then this is kind of a learning time for the entire district community of residents and businesses and government agencies, that there was a law that was passed in 2018 covering all adults with disabilities who reside in the District of Columbia. It's the Disability Services Reform Amendment Act is the name of the law. There's not going to be a quiz on that, so don't worry. But it has this supported decision-making agreement form in the law. And that's why we're doing some training on this. And so what district law, what that means is, like, well, if there's a form, why do we need to know about the law? Because the law now in the district defines supported decision making and gives some other terms and definitions. And in that way, it cements kind of the right to informal supported decision making, and also makes that formal supported decision making right available for the first time for adults in a non-school context. So these are the definitions that come directly from the code, from DC code. The process of supporting and accommodating an adult with a disability in order to, you all can read it as well as I can, but I usually read my way through these when I'm training staff, just because it tends to slow it down and then you get all the words. And that's always helpful in training about technical content, I find. So assist the adult with the disability in understanding the options, responsibilities, and consequences of life decision, and to enable the adult with a disability to make life decisions without impeding the self-determination of that adult. So those are the definitions in the law. And then, as I said, we talked to people about this new DC supported decision-making agreement that's available to all adults with disabilities for use across the district in all of the contexts where they may need them. There's something important to know about this supported decision-making agreement, which is the law itself, that DC code provision that I cited back here, down at the bottom, DC code 7-2131. There's not going to be a quiz about that either, but the law literally contains this form in it. And so the form that's used for a supported decision-making agreement must substantially match what's written in the law. And so what we've done at the DC Department on Disability Services is to partner with Quality Trust, who we talked about before, and also we had our Family Support Council review it. We developed an information and instructions packet and paired it with the form. And those documents are available for anyone who wants them, but we send people from our agency looking for information about supported decision-making and decision-making rights to an area on our website called DC Decision-Making Rights, DDS Decision-Making Rights for people with disabilities. And so if people search for this phrase, they'll come upon that on our website. And so I don't know whether it may be valuable for other agencies to have a similar area on their website where they put supported decision-making materials or something, but I that's what we did. And I think it's been helpful to be able to refer people to it. Do you have any questions at this point? Because otherwise I'll kind of jump into what's in this supported decision-making agreement. Okay. Jump in if you do. But in advance of the training, you should have received, if you were signed up for the training in advance, a package of materials and links. And the materials and links include the supported decision-making information and instructions packet that I was just talking about back here. And it also includes, like, either as a link or as an attachment, a PDF of a digital form for the supported decision-making agreement, so that a person could literally fill in the boxes in a digital form, which I've used in these virtual trainings. So here's what I typically do at the trainings when we do them in person, and someday we will be training in person again, I imagine, but there's so much virtual training that can be done. It's, I think, a gift that we're spending some time developing some of those virtual trainings too. But what I typically have people do if I train in person is to have people literally go through and try to fill out the form as though they themselves need a supporter. This is the same kind of work that we do in our agency around person-centered thinking, which is have people use those person-centered thinking system tools and fill them out as though they themselves are someone who has a disability and needs to use those tools. They're valuable in all kinds of ways in our lives, but so that's what I do in terms of the training practice, is have people fill out the form. And what that does is it helps people kind of focus on, well, what does all this language mean? And so here on the screen, I'm showing you here, up here at the top, it's a supported decision-making agreement. We've said where this form can be found in district law. There's a couple of very specific provisions in the law around the form. And that is that as we were negotiating the language of this form with the District of Columbia council offices before this was passed, one of the things that they wanted to make sure was that people who rely on this form, businesses, government agencies who relies on the form, can do that without fear that they're going to be liable for honoring or respecting the form that the person has completed properly. So that's one of the items that's in there, if that makes sense. So this is where I was talking about, these are our practice points. As we have people fill out the supported decision-making agreement, I have them do it, and then we go through it literally kind of piece by piece. What does that first note mean? And by that, I mean what I just showed you on the top of the first page. Why is that important? There's some rules in the new law about who can be a supporter and who cannot be a supporter, which we're going to go into in a little more detail. But the person filling out one of these forms can say what areas of life they want the supporter to help them make decisions in. So financial area is a good example. Housing may be a good one. Government services may be another one. And what other forms might the person need to complete depending on the types of decisions that they choose to have support? For example, if it's a healthcare decision and they want to, complete some forms that allow people to get access to their medical records, if you're going to a new doctor's office. The person can choose to have this be an open-ended or time-limited agreement. And then we talk about who has to sign the agreement, which is the person and the supporters. And then it needs to be either witnessed or notarized. And that's how a person knows that it's effective. How does a person or supporter cancel a supported decision-making agreement? And where can a person get help if they need it? The form that we have on our website and the information instruction packet answers all of these questions for people. So we usually just walk through it piece by piece. Do people have any questions about that? if you open the form instruction packet, you'll see that the instruction packet is kind of long and explains supported decision-making agreements, supported decision-making as a concept, the difference between informal and formal, and then includes the form and gives instructions about how to fill out the form. And it's meant to be used, at least the way we've done it at DDS, is to have the information instruction packet, something that can just be ripped off, you know, just kind of, if it's all stapled together, rip off the first few pages, and then you just have the form that the person has filled out. So then one of the things that we have done, as we've done some of the trainings at DDS over the last few years, is to gather some of the main questions that we were asked by people about the supported decision-making agreement. So now there's this new piece of paper, this new form, right? Who can use this supported decision-making agreement? And the answer is an adult with a disability here in the district. And here is one of the questions that we've got. If a person has a general guardianship, if a court has appointed a person a general guardianship, how does the supported decision-making agreement work with that? Because a general guardianship means that a guardian has the ability to make decisions for the person, major life decisions for the person. And so the answer to that is a person with a general guardian can't use a supported decision-making agreement to make decisions a court has said they cannot make for themselves. A person can make any decisions that a court has not said that somebody else can make for them, and a guardian should listen to a person's wishes in any case. But that's how the supported decision-making agreement works with a general guardianship. If there's a limited guardianship, say, for example, if it just covers health care, then we teach people things like, but the person has control over their own money. The person could have a supported decision-making agreement regarding someone supporting them to manage their finances, but not to make decisions about their health care, if that makes sense, depending on what the limited guardianship says. And I think probably everybody on this call knows, but we also just remind people that a guardianship, it's as broad as the language that the court assigns in terms of what the guardianship covers. Here's another question that we get asked. So in the world of disability law and policy, there's a lot of paperwork that people fill out, right? And, you know, some of it gets filed places, and some of it the person carries places. The supported decision-making agreement works, its power comes from it being in the person's hands when they show it or give it to be placed on file somewhere. The person themselves, the person with a disability, has the power to use the supported decision-making agreement, or the supporter can help the person use it. They show it or give it to the school, if it's a school-based document, a business, medical office, hospital, or government agencies. And then they use supporters for the types of decisions that are listed in it. So in other words, one of the questions we've been asked is there some place, you know, some magic place on the internet or somewhere else where all of these supported decision-making agreements for all people in the district are to be filed? And the answer to that is no. There's not a magic online repository of these documents. It has power in the person's hands. And in that way, it works a little like a power of attorney agreement, right? If there's a person has a power of attorney, they give it to their power of attorney, and that person can then go and act on their behalf. But the difference between those things is, in a supported decision-making agreement, the person retains the decision-making authority. In a power of attorney form, they're giving that authority to somebody else to exercise on their behalf, if that makes sense. In the world of lawyers, we say that person is standing in the person's shoes. Do people have any questions at this point about how the supported decision-making agreement works? These can be placed on file with a government agency or a business. For example, we accept them in-house, and then they would be uploaded into a person's file. Or they could be placed on file in a bank, someplace like that. So this is something I was saying we would get to in a few minutes when we were looking at the list of things that are in the form, which is, in informal supported decision-making, the district doesn't place any restrictions on what other adult can serve as a supporter to a person with a disability. But in informal decision-making with a supported decision-making agreement, Some people are disqualified from serving as supporters for specific reasons that are listed in the law and at least on the form that we have developed at DDS, and that's available on our website. And those reasons are, if a person has been found to be exploitive, there's a very specific set of reasons that are set forth on there. If there's been exploitation is one of them, and there are some other reasons. So both the person who's signing on to be a supporter has to basically certify that they are not they are not somebody who has done some of the things listed in that law in order to be able to serve as a supporter. One of the things, this is what I was just talking about the difference between a supporter and what they do and a representative and what they do. A representative, right, is somebody that the court names who makes decision for themselves, or as we attorneys like to say, stands in the shoes of the person. A general guardian is one type of representative, and attorney is another. So, for example, if a person with a disability names an attorney to represent them in a matter, that attorney can make decisions as though they are the person, and so could a general guardian. A supporter, by contrast, is someone the person chooses to help with decisions, not make them. And again, this is just, kind of the repetition with points throughout the training, as you'll see. So the question for you all to figure out as you go forward to train is, at your agency, how are representatives handled? How does your agency sort of capture information? How do they, whoops, I've gone too far. How do they store that information? And how is that saved to the person's records at your agency? And then how does the person receive notice of what's happening? So these are just some of the questions to be answered by your agency as you prepare a training on supported decision making for your staff, and getting to that, real clarity about the difference between representatives and supporters. So, for example, I've been asked before, well, could a supporter come in without a person and make decisions? And the answer to that is, of course, no, because the supporter does not have decision-making authority separate from the person. If the person is there and they're communicating with the supporter can help them communicate their decision, but they cannot make the decision for them. And so that's kind of just a key point to clarify for staff that you're training. If people have questions, jump in at any point in time. People have any questions? Okay.
This is Clarence speaking. Can a person have more than one supporter?
Clarence, gold star for that question. Yes, a person could have more than one supporter, but if they're, they could have different supporters that they use at different times. They could have different supporters that they bring to different meetings. If they're informal supporters, they can just bring them. If they're using a supported decision-making agreement, they'll have to use one form per supporter, because the supporter, the way this form is laid out, there's really only room to name one person and then have that person sign like they need to. So, if, for example, if you, if I had, if I was a person with a disability and I had wanted one supporter, like my sister Kathy, to help me with my finances, and I wanted my brother Michael to help me with my, healthcare decisions, I would have a supported decision-making agreement for each of them that they had then signed and that was witnessed or notarized the way the form requires. And it says right on the form what's required too. But yeah, that's a super, super good question. I mean, if they're informal supporters, for example, at DDS, if a person brings in their mom one time and their sister the next time, that's not a problem, but it does raise this question about confidentiality. I actually learned a lot about our agency processes as in developing this training. So at DDS, for example, confidentiality is required whenever a person brings a third party to a meeting. A supporter is a third party, even though they're a third party with a very specific name and title and function. But here's what we do if a person brings a third party to a meeting, which is we clarify what the relationship is between the person that is being served or supported or is applying for services or supports. We ask for the person's permission to share the meeting's information with the third party, and we document the response. That's the first step. Step two, if the person does not want to share information with the third party, then it is our role to ask the person politely to wait in our waiting area. And step three, if the person wants to waive confidentiality to share information or records with a third party in an ongoing way, we also have them sign a DDS release form that's been prepared by our Office of General Counsel. There's a standard release form that we use for these processes, and then that is also uploaded into the person's file, so it made a permanent part of the record. If people have any questions about that, so we just, as you're going to teach this in your agency, the question is, what are the requirements there? Because then you want to spell those out and then teach those to your staff. So then the next piece that we do when we're doing these trainings is to, depending on what the staff roles are and which administration they work for, because we have a couple of different administrations and there's some overlap obviously in their work, but when they work with a person on different issues that they have, but we have a developmental disabilities administration and a rehabilitation services administration, and so each of those has different policies and procedures where supported decision making may apply. So what I've done for these trainings is, depending on who I'm training, taken a look at the existing policies where supported decision making may apply, identify those policies, teach about the specific policies, give people I'm training, be specific about which policy provisions apply and how they work in practice. Give people a chance to review the policies before the training starts. So for example, we sent them out to you all in advance. And then during the training, provide people with some practice opportunities. So we're going to use our Developmental Disabilities Administration policies and procedures for this purpose. And links or copies of those were emailed to people who registered for the training in advance of it. Does anybody not have those? Because I think Emily could probably forward them on to people if anyone needs them at this point. Or you can receive them after. So we identified a few policies and procedures in each administration. What's nice about kind of identifying these specific policies and procedures when we send them out to people is it encourages people generally to read our policies and procedures, which is always valuable. But it also gives them a chance to kind of think about supported decision making in the context of these specific policies. So we have a policy on intake and eligibility. And this is where what I have done for our agency is kind of outline the application points of the policy and procedure related to supported decision making, if that makes sense. So here they are. DDA staff shall assist all people in completion of the application packet for services. And this includes respecting person supported decision making during the process of completing the application packet for services. So that's one part of the policy that's implicated. The policy also says staff shall coordinate translation and language interpretation services for non-native English speakers. Supported decision making may be part of this need if the person chooses. And then a third point in this particular policy and procedure, I think, is staff also shall provide additional assistance as needed, and that may include honoring a person's informal or formal supported decision making. So this is kind of a critical piece as people are starting to engage substantively with the agency and figuring out whether they're going to be eligible for our supports and services. It may be that right from the beginning they need to use supported decision making. Do people have any questions about that? Otherwise, I'll just proceed on here. And Emily, I'm assuming you're going to jump in if people note questions in the chat box.
Yes. Yep.
Outstanding. There's a freedom of choice form, but really for all of our developmental disabilities administration form, it's to take the same approach with the freedom of choice form as with DDA intake and eligibility applications. And for all of our DDA forms, what we're trying to do is sort of just get people to really, at the same time that they're thinking about the work that they're carrying out related to these policies and procedures, as they're meeting with people to do this work across, in this case, all of their work for DDA and working with people and their families and whatever supporters they bring in, to really just get them to think about using supported decision making if the person wants to do that. This is a big policy for our Developmental Disabilities Administration, the Individual Support Plan Policy and Procedure. So this is kind of the, this really spells out all of the supports and services that a person receives and is renewed generally on an annual basis. So this is one of the policies and procedures that implicates supported decision making possibly. So DDA staff provide information and support so a person can direct their planning to the greatest extent possible and engage people from the person's circle of supports. So there's actually a support team, a multidisciplinary support team that works with people related to their individual support plans. And so this is an area where we want our staff, and so we train them on this, to respect a person's supported decision-making supporters. And one of the things that's important here is people get named to their support team. They're involved in those decisions. But also if there's a particular person that a person whose ISP is being written wants to use as their supporter, then this is the context in which to name that. We want to ensure that a person is able to make informed choices and decisions. And if you think back several slides, one of the things that we are saying is training people to do is say, one of the things that supporters can help people do is gather information so they can make informed choices and decisions. So supported decision making may be a part of their individual support plan choices and information. One thing that is a good quality of a supporter is that they're able to communicate with the person in the way that's easiest and best for the person, that the person indicates is how they want to communicate, which in some cases may be non-verbally. And so this can be kind of a critical support of the planning process. And person-centered planning processes reflect cultural consideration, use plain language, and are accessible, such as providing interpreters, reading documents aloud, or using large print documents. This is another policy. And so you kind of get, as you're thinking about training at your own agency, we try not to go down into like so much detail that a person is bogged down in it as we're training, but kind of the high points and pointing out these specific policies and procedures. So this is another one: protection, use, and release of personal information. And I'll let you just read this form. It's these things tend to be, it's the same concept being repeated over and over again, but it's worth it because it is not, these things are not necessarily obvious. They really are processes to be taught, and they usually involve multiple steps, and we're training people to think about all of those steps as they're going through the process, right? The larger issue of confidentiality, getting, in this context, signed release forms where needed, dealing with issues around implied consent when a third party is present. And again, to kind of emphasize, when in doubt, ask the person themselves. So I'm hoping that all makes sense, that what you want to do for your agencies, if you're training there, is to identify policies and procedures. And in identifying them, just to let you know, our process for figuring out which ones implicated that for our Rehabilitation Services Administration, I work mostly with DDA, but there's a policy analyst that works mostly with RSA, and so I asked the managers in that administration, and then did a quick double check by flipping through all of the policies on the website as well. So that's how I gathered that information. If you are working for an agency where you have to go, okay, well, which of our many policies and procedures implicate supported decision making in particular? So along the way, here's another one of those questions people ask. So does DDS, or in this case, the Developmental Disabilities Administration, since I'm using them as our training model, favor either informal supported decision-making or supported decision-making agreements? Here's why that's an important question. Because we ask staff that work with people to fill out so many different documents related. And so one of the questions that I was asked is, is filling out a supported decision-making agreement now just one of the papers that's supposed to be filled out when a person comes here? And the answer to that is no, it is not just a document that needs to be filled out. Again, this is going back to Quality Trust's point that it's a paradigm shift really about decision-making and who has the power. We don't favor at DDS or DDA a particular kind of supported decision-making, informal or formal. That is up to the person if they want to use it at all or which kind they want to use. But then here, we're just making a couple of notes. The service coordinator is responsible for ensuring that notices are sent to the person, to a supporter, if the person wants it sent. And a person at DDS can use either informal or formal supporter and say they should receive notices. Apologize for coughing. It's allergy season. So let's see how this is supposed to work. And this was actually an area that our service coordinators had some questions about because it's kind of a change, right, with the new supported decision-making agreement. So this is an area where there's some technical steps. So as you're thinking about your agency and training there, the question is, what steps do you want to teach as part of this process? Which steps need to be taught? Which steps do you want to reinforce? So these are kind of training questions for you all to figure out. What we wanted to do here was to explain step by step what's the difference in how to document a person's supported decision making, depending on whether they're using informal supported decision making or using the supported decision making agreement or the form, right? And they're a little bit different. And you can see the steps there. MCIS is our client database. So there's a bunch of steps to go through in terms of informal supported decision making, including if they're using informal supported decision making and the person wants to, so they haven't filled out a supported decision making agreement. That's what informal means, right? And they want a person to receive future information or notices. Then a person does need to sign it. The person with the disability needs to sign a DDS release form because that gives permission for those for that to be carried out, for their wishes to be carried out in terms of the release of information. If a person is using the supported decision-making agreement, and here I'm not trying to get into the weeds, but I just want to show that for us, there were some very specific practice points. If the supported decision-making agreement, and there's a form being filled out, if a service coordinator is presented with a supported decision-making agreement, they have to make sure it's completely filled out and signed and either witnessed or notarized. And the reason that's important is because if you're then going to release information based on the supported decision-making agreement, the person does not also have to sign a DDS release form. Under DC law, the supported decision-making agreement properly filled out and saying, giving permission to share information with the supporter is adequate legal notice. Does that make sense? Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay. So what we do next, and let me just stop here and see whether there's any questions on the training generally. Otherwise, our next step in the training is to practice with some case studies. And we're gonna take a look at those, and I'm gonna ask somebody to, unmute themselves and read our little stories here in a minute, and then jump in to help us answer the questions. I'll note that my colleague Emily, who's on this training with us here, helped me develop these case studies and some of the responses, so appreciated her help with this. So our first our first practice, and we're going to use 2 different case examples to train, and you would want to make for your trainings case examples that make sense with your agency. Again, this is our Developmental Disabilities Administration, but we are focused a lot on kind of increasing employment opportunities for people with intellectual disabilities who are served by the agency. And so we have a couple of kind of job-related examples here. Our first one is Hallie, who's 23 years old, graduated high school 2 years ago, and is looking for work, but isn't quite sure she wants a job. So here's the story, Hallie's story. If I could ask one of you to unmute and read it, that would be great.
I can read. This is LaShawn. I'll read it.
Thanks, LaShawn.
Hallie is a 23-year-old woman who graduated high school 2 years ago and communicates well orally. She lives with her mom, Denise. Hallie is half-hearted looking for work. She wants to meet people, find a boyfriend, and have her own money. Denise is worried about Hallie's judgment and ability to make good decisions for herself and has been told by many that she should become her guardian. However, she heard about supported decision making at a recent Supporting Families Community of Practice meeting. The question that brought them to service coordination: should Denise become Hallie's guardian or her supporter?
Yeah, and what does all this have to do with supported decision making, right? So typically in a training, then what I've done is if it's in person, handed people out this story and then ask them a bunch of questions about this. But we can maybe, if people want to join in here, sort of, these are scenarios for service coordinators and service coordination supervisors, because they're our frontline staff in the Developmental Disabilities Administration. And so, people come in and families come in, and this is the kind of scenario they might be presented with. So if you're doing training at your agency, you want to come up with, kind of a similar, or, a scenario that works and makes sense with supported decision making. And so, our question, and this is a typical question from our person-centered thinking tools, is what's working, not working in this scenario? If anybody wants to join in, and what do we think about supported decision making in this context? What should happen in this meeting with Hallie and Denise?
I believe it should be supported decision making, because Hallie was able to graduate high school. It says she communicates well. I think mom would be a good supporter in just helping her understand how to make different decisions. That's just my opinion.
Yeah. I mean,
Right.
somebody else going to jump in?
Yeah, this is Jalima from HSCSN. I agree with LaShawn. I would also like to clarify further what Denise is what makes Denise worried about Hallie's ability to make good decisions, because there's nothing that indicates that she lacks capacity to do so. So I would want to explore that more. And ultimately, it is Hallie's decision if she wants a supporter or a guardian. So we will want to make sure that we educate on both. But I'll be more curious to know what the concern is about her past decisions.
Right. Yeah. I don't have more than that's a good thing to dive into. We would one of the things we would encourage is kind of that initial step that we would use, which is to actually inquire whether Hallie wants to, Hallie's an adult, mom's a third party. She's a loving third party, but she's a third party. Does Hallie want to have a meeting independent of Denise? Does Hallie want mom in this meeting? I totally agree with you. I mean, she graduated high school, and it sounds like she was on a little bit of a longer track to do that, but that is not uncommon. And Denise may have her own ideas about her life, and Hallie might have her own decisions that she might wants to make. And just to let you all know, our Supporting Families Community of Practice is something that we work with at DDS. So and everybody in this meeting kind of has their own brings their own perspective of what's working and not working, maybe these are some of the answers that that Emily helped me develop here. So what, you know, it needs to be clarified. Does Hallie want to work? Is Hallie receiving supports? She graduated from high school, so you know, it may be time to sort of get her, you know, over to our Rehabilitation Services Administration, actually, because um, they help people with disabilities on the path to employment and help the person pick out an employment goal that they're going to pursue and so forth. So, you know, there may be different ways for your agency as you're doing training to, you know, lay out what decisions need to be made and how supported decision making should figure in. I mean, one question is, does Hallie even feel like she needs a supporter to make decisions? Even though my guess is Denise has probably been helping her make decisions for a long time. So there's a threshold question in that too. And then what are Hallie's goals in the long term? I find it doubtful if she graduated from high school that a court is going to name a guardian, but that depends on, you know, the whole factual scenario. So then, you know, our next step, and this is just, again, we're taking who we're training through the thought process, is to lay out a possible action plan as a training mechanism. And these are some of the issues that I was just talking about there. And so in this number 3, talking about brainstorming with Hallie and Denise, if Hallie wants to participate, who else may be available to support Hallie in making decisions regarding employment. And then we have these are person-centered thinking tools that can be helpful in this regard. So, you know, I'm not sure, you know, exactly what kind of scenarios might work for you all in training in your agency, but our goal is to kind of take people through the initial like thought process and get them to look at it from everybody's point of view. Denise may be like, what do you mean I can't stay in this meeting if Hallie doesn't want her to stay? And that's its own piece that has to be negotiated. So do people have questions about that? Can you see what kind of stories might be relevant for your agency to use as a training mechanism? I mean, if Hallie does want to use supported decision making, does she just want to informally bring her mom when she wants to, or does she want to have a supported decision making agreement? This symposium I was at last year, there was a panel of self advocates there talking about how they use supported decision making, and one of the young women was talking about how her aunt is her supporter, and she picked her because she's, you know, just always respected her and, you know, been supportive of her and thought she would help her make decisions independent of what her immediate family may want her to do. And I think, you know, we sometimes see that with families we work with. So here's our second practice scenario. And we just used a couple. I think if I was going to rewrite these now, I would pick something that was not a second one on the same topic, job related. But in any case, here we are with this one, just because I think trying to get into a different story with a little bit richer content is helpful. But here's our practice with Anthony, who's 44. He doesn't have work experience, but he's been doing some job readiness services. So here's our story. If somebody's willing to read this is the same thing I do with training participants.
I can read it. Anthony's story. Anthony is a 44-year-old man who does not have a job and has been in RSA, job readiness services, for a year plus. He is artistic, social, and enjoys being around people. Anthony's sister, Dana, is his informal decision-making supporter for the past 6 months. Dana has her own concerns that Anthony will be taken advantage of in a traditional job setting and wants him to get a job on a supervised work crew with people with similar disabilities. Anthony was referred to RSA for supported employment services, has an individual plan for an employment meeting, and wants to use the same provider, has questions about whether working will affect benefits. I'm sorry, I have something that's blocking the rest of it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much for reading. I appreciate everybody participating. So we go through the same process in our training, which is to spell out what's working and what's not working from the perspectives of different people. We use this to talk not just about supported decision making, but also about the fact that when our Rehabilitation Services Administration works with people on individual plans for employment and helps them find jobs, our job is to place them in competitive integrated employment settings, not to put them in teams that only include people with disabilities or into other kinds of segregated workplaces. So it's just, there's a way to use these kind of trainings to kind of emphasize a couple of different points. So we've done that here. And again, we just lay out here what's working and not working from everyone's perspective, go through the same process of laying out a possible action plan. And then, so those are our two examples of how it is that we've gone about, really trying to help people think through how to use supported decision making here. And what happens in this one in particular, right? What happens when a family member has their own ideas about what someone should do, but the person, A, that's not the kind of supports that the agency provides, and B, that's not necessarily what the person is looking for. So then,
Liz, I'm so sorry. Do you mind if I just add a thought on that one?
Please do.
Okay. Just as you're developing the scenarios for your agency that might resonate a bit more with your audience, your learners, I think one of the things that's helpful is before you, exactly what Liz did, before you click over to the working, not working, ask people, what their thoughts are, when you're doing that, listen to hear if people want to seek understanding of the situation versus kind of jumping to an answer, which I think both LaShawn and Jalima, you both did. You said, well, I want to learn more about da 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 da, which is exactly the responses that you'll want to hear. If you hear people say instead kind of those knee-jerk reactions like, oh, well, she needs or he needs a guardian or da 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 da, that's where you want to pause and kind of make sure you kind of emphasize that, okay, well, we want to try to understand the situation, and here's where a working, not working tool is really helpful to help understand the situation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I totally agree with that. And in some ways, I'm, running through the second scenario, you can kind of see how that conversation would unfold. But I totally agree that, and then leaving some time for them to jump in, even in a virtual environment. I found that people will jump in more, and I'm not necessarily. I don't usually do this, but I've been told by our training experts at the agency that they just call on people who they see listed in their listed on their screen here in the gallery of names. So what we do next in the training is also just tell people where they can learn more about supported decision making, because there is a lot of information about this, and supported decision making is a growing formalized, and especially in state laws, is kind of a growing area of emphasis in disability rights across the country. There are more and more states kind of jumping on the bandwagon here, and then more and more people are coming to know and understand this is just an incredibly valuable tool. I mean, here in the district, we've had people who have stopped having guardians and stopped being committed, and instead are using kind as supported decision-making tools, and supported decision-making tools. And that's just, in terms of people's autonomy and self-empowerment, it's just incredibly valuable in terms of people getting to live a good life. It's a large step in the right direction, typically. So these are a couple of places, and then we've talked about these earlier in the training: Quality Trust and the National Resource Center for Supported Decision Making. And then I usually just close the training with some thoughts on supported decision making. Generally, these are all quotes from the symposium I was at last year that I liked. This is that young self-advocate I was telling you about. It's a good thing I tell my supporters my decision and my plan, then I just follow up with them later to let them know what happened. And that I think really puts it in context, which is the supporters help me make my decision, and then I go on with my life, and sometime later I just, tell them, oh yeah, I did that thing that you helped me make the decision about. It's simply something the rest of us take for granted. Bob Dinnerstein, who's a professor at University of Washington College of Law, where I got my law degree, and this was the keynote speaker at that symposium. Take away the disability lens, it just looks like life, said Judge Kristen Booth Glenn, who's at CUNY School of Law. And that really is sort of the conclusion of our Train the Trainers training using our DDA model. But I'm happy to answer any questions or discuss anything anyone would like. And if not, then just thanks so much for participating, you all. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
If anyone did not
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If anyone did not receive the materials and would like to receive them, if you could drop that in the chat very quickly, I think Emily will see it.
Yes, I'll see it. And thanks everyone so much for joining. And Liz and I are available if you have any follow-up questions.
Thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.